Death Ray Cat channel. Today we're going to look at strumming patterns. Normally this channel looks at the styles of rockabilly, punk, rock and roll, blues, that sort of thing. But I want you to know that these techniques can be used in most styles of popular music with a guitar, so no matter what you're into, you'll be able to take something from this video. We're going to start off with the real basics and gradually get a little bit more complicated, so if you're a bit more advanced, feel free to jump forward. I've time-stamped the exercises below. It's going to be quite a long video, so if you want to try some of the exercises, pause it and then come back to it later, that might be a good way to use a video. You'll find all the tabs for these exercises in my Patreon below, and you'll also find loads of other videos and exclusive stuff if you sign up. We're going to start off by looking at how to hold the pick. I like to go for this kind of method, so your pick is pointing at a right angle to your thumb like that, and I'm using my finger to hold that pick. There's a bunch of different ways to do this, you'll want to experiment. I've got a bit of a loose technique. I'll start off like this and I'll end up moving my fingers around depending on what I'm strumming. Once you're holding the pick, you can try strumming all those strings in a downstroke. So we'll go from the ones closest to you and bring that pick through so it's bouncing on all of those strings. You might want to hold it quite lightly so it doesn't get stuck. Like that. So if it's the first time you've ever tried to strum a guitar, you might want to try that, just going down, so that all of those strings are ringing out. You might notice sometimes you do better if you're holding the pick a little looser. It gives it that bit of movement to be able to move around. And then you can try picking upwards as well. So that's what I'd start doing if you've never even picked up a guitar before and you want to do chords. So in this video I'm going to use a couple of symbols to denote whether I'm doing an upstroke or a downstroke, and you'll see these in music and tab everywhere. There's these two funny little symbols. The one that looks like a little table shape, that means we're going to go down. And this one that looks like an arrow, that means we're going to go up. And I've given us a really simple chord to play with, so we're not just playing those open strings, we're going to start with an E minor. Here's the diagram for that. I'm going to use two fingers for that. Middle finger on the 2nd fret of the A string, or the 5th string, and then the ring finger on the 2nd fret of the D string, or the 4th string. And all those other notes, all those other strings are left open, so my fingers aren't on them. So that's what your chord's going to sound like. You could also use your 1st and 2nd fingers if you find that easier, and it's important to get those fingers nice and arched over so we're not touching the other strings around it, so they can ring out. That just sounds a little better than if we're just playing those open strings. So there you go, there's your first chord. It's really important to get the timing right when we're practicing strumming, so it's good to set up a metronome or play along to a track. And now we're going to try with our first exercise, just a really simple pattern to play along with the track to get the downstrokes in time. So let's try that. Try it without the metronome or backing track first. Just get used to moving that arm down and up and down again. Okay, so if you were to set your metronome to 80 BPM, we'd be hitting a downstroke for every click. So that backing track is also set to 80 BPM, so you should be hearing a bass drum and then a snare and then a bass drum and then a snare for 1, 2, 3, 4. That's how we're going to separate those bars. Next up, we're going to try and make it a little more complicated. We're going to add an upstroke in between each of those beats. So we're going to play down, then up, then down, then up, down, and up, like this. This is where you might start to notice your pick getting a bit loose, or maybe if you're holding on too hard, you might find it's dragging a little bit on the string. So if you can loosen up a little bit, you'll feel that pick moving against the strings in the opposite direction. So you'll have to experiment with that a bit and see what's your best way of holding the pick. It does move around and your fingers might become tighter and looser. So we're doing 8 strokes per bar this time because we're hitting those upstrokes in between the downstrokes. So let's try that. Maybe you can try a little faster, or if it's too difficult you can slow your metronome down. It's at 80 BPM at the minute on that track. Maybe try 60, maybe try 50, and the important thing is all those ups and downs are evenly spaced. So we're going to move on to the third exercise. When we're hearing these strumming patterns, I like to think of it as that simple up and down as a framework for those patterns, and what we're going to do is take out the occasional up or down stroke, and that's going to give it a slightly different feel or rhythm. So to begin with, we're going to keep it real simple, just take out one of those strokes. We're going to take out the first upstroke in that bar. So we're going to go down. Then to skip that upstroke, we're just going to bring the arm up, and then we're going to go down, up, down, up, down, up, and then we cycle round to the start of the bar again. So let's try that. So what I want to point out here is you'll notice my right arm is always going down and up at the same speed, and when I'm not hitting one of those upstrokes, my arm is still coming up. So that's the main thing that's going to help you keep that rhythm. And that's going to be the same throughout all of these different strumming patterns. The right arm is going to keep going up and down like a little motor, and we're just omitting those strokes when we don't want them. Again, if you want to try it a little slower, you can set up a metronome, go for it. You want to get those up and downs in time. So by doing this, we can get a variety of textures. So that was one exercise, taking one out. So next we're going to try taking out 2 strokes. We're going to take out upstrokes, but this time we're taking out the second as we did before, but also the 6th. So it's going to sound like this. So yeah, we'll try that nice and slow. And you'll notice on the notation the lower parts look a little different because we're letting those notes ring out for longer than the others. This is a whole another lesson that I'll go into another time, but for now all you need to know is your right arm is still doing exactly the same. So yeah, start off real slow and then you can eventually build it up. But the important thing is a rhythm. Start off slow, speed it up when you're ready and happy with it. So now we're going to take the same idea and get a little bit more complex. We're going to take out 2 upstrokes and a downstroke. You might have heard this one in places before. It's going to sound like this. So straight after the second omitted upstroke, we're going to skip out a downstroke as well, which means it's going to be an even longer pause. And also, I'm kind of exaggerating a bit, but your right hand is going to be going up and down during that part for even longer. So let's slow it right down. Skip out the up, we go down, then we skip out an up and a down, and then we do an up, down, up, and then it cycles round. So that's going to feel a little weird at first, but yeah, I really think if you use this right arm as a kind of motor that you're kind of not thinking about, that will become a lot easier. So you can try that, maybe try it a little faster as well. Eventually you might be able to get it sounding real fast. That's all minor stuff, major. So yeah, what you can do with these, you can practice them one by one. As you get a little bit more used to them, you could maybe mix them up. So you could start with one pattern and then go into the next one, or maybe just keep it dead simple, up, down, up, down, up, down for a few bars, and then do one of these examples. I don't know, let's try mixing it up a bit. Play around with it, see what you come up with. You might come up with your own strumming patterns or something you've heard elsewhere. So the idea is taking that grid of up downs and taking out the odd stroke and see what happens. We can also try a swung rhythm as well. I think I'm going to look at that in a separate video because this one's going to be long enough as it is. But swing rhythm might be something that interests you. Instead of just going up, down, evenly. Those ups and downs are slightly differently spaced, but like I say, I'll go into that in another video. Let me know if you want to know about that. By the way, all these tabs, they're going to be in my Patreon. They'll be on the screen as well, but if you want to download the tablatures, I'll have them in my Patreon. Also, if you just want to support me, all that stuff will be down there below. So once you're comfortable doing one chord and your right arm is feeling pretty comfortable, you might want to think about changing chords. So I've got a couple of examples here. Some chords are easier to play than others, so I've picked out some reasonably easy ones to change between. We're going to go with some fairly easy cowboy chords. Done a lesson on them, by the way. We'll take the E major and the A major. So we'll have some diagrams coming up. Let's start with the E major. Now, earlier we were looking at the E minor, and I said that I was going to use my middle finger and ring finger. That's because to make this minor a major is very easy. If you're playing it like this, we can add one finger, your first finger, onto the G string or the third string on the first fret there. So that's made your E minor a major. There's a difference of one semitone. That's an interesting subject in itself, which I'll cover in another lesson later on. So there we go, there's your E major. Now the A major, it's kind of easy to remember because we're using 3 fingers and we're just going to be using the second frets on the D, G and B strings. And we're going to play the open A string or the 5th string. We're going to skip out the E, don't worry about playing the E. So that's another little thing to remember when you're playing this chord, we're not playing the low E there. We're going to play the A, 2nd fret on the D, 2nd fret on the G, 2nd fret on the B, and then the open E up here. There's your A chord. So hopefully you've got that. So before you get used to changing between these two, you want to learn those, so that's step 1. And then before worrying about your timing so much, I would just try and train your fingers to go from one to the other. So E major, take your hand off, A major, and back and forth. When you're fairly confident with that, we can try the strumming thing. So we'll just try a down-up strumming pattern for these. So you start off slow and then build it up. One thing to remember with changing chords, it's okay if we're doing a real slow change like that, a slow BPM or whatever. I've got time to lift off my fingers and get to the next chord, but in real life, if you're playing quite fast, you might notice that there's a bit of crossover between playing a chord and moving over, so you know it's impossible to magically move your hands in time to some of those beats. So what you can do so on that last upstroke I'm just taking the hand off and you don't notice it, it's happening so fast and it kind of sounds nice anyway. It's like a natural rhythmic sound that you'll hear on loads of records. See what I mean? Hope that makes sense. That's a little cheat for you there. If you wanted to, you could pick any chord you wanted and try changing those too. You know, as many chords as you wanted, that's how you write a song, changing the strumming patterns, and that's what we're going to look at next. We're going to try looking at one or two examples. So I'm going to call this one the Creedence because it's from a Creedence song. It's probably from a bunch of other stuff as well, but that's what I associate with it. So we're just going to stick with one chord on this. It's a slightly different strumming pattern and a slightly different technique as well. So for all the other ones, we've been letting the strings ring out when we're not playing them. On this one, we're going to omit one of the strokes, but instead of not playing it, we're going to mute it. So that's going to involve this left hand. So we're going to start with a G chord. Here's how I'm going to play this G chord. There's a bunch of different ways for doing it, but let's go with this one. Middle finger on the 3rd fret on the E string. First finger, 2nd fret on the A string. Then we're going to have D open, G open, B open, and your ring finger on the 3rd fret of the top E string. I call it the top E string because it's higher in pitch, but it's lowest to the ground. That can be confusing. You'll get used to it. So, there's your G. Now, if we were doing an up-down simple kind of progression, it'd sound like that. That's fine, but what we're going for, we're going to omit the 2nd downstroke, but instead of just omitting it and letting it ring, which sounds kind of cool, let's try muting it with this left hand. I'm going to take the middle finger and lie it flat against all of those strings. I'm not pushing down hard enough for it to make those notes ring out, because it would sound like that. Horrible. So what we do is all those fingers, even the ones in the chords that isn't the middle finger, we're just laying them slightly on the strings, and then when you pick them, they're just going to make a choked kind of muted sound. Just going to do that on that 2nd downstroke. If you play it really slow, it sounds kind of weird and not great. It's not so bad. Then we'll speed it up. There we go, have a go at that. Notice how the right hand is always down, up at the same rate. Here's another real life example of a strumming pattern. We're going to look at the Peggy Sue chord progression by Bo Didley. So we'll need to know the A chord, which I've shown you earlier, but here's the diagram. We'll need to know a D major, and for this we're only using the top 4 strings. That's the open D, the 2nd fret on the G with your first finger, ring finger's going on the 3rd fret of the B string, middle finger's going on the 2nd fret of the E string. That's a D major. And we're going to use the E major, which I also showed you earlier, but there's the diagram. The strumming pattern for this, let's look at that first. We'll take the A major chord. Let's tune up a bit. So just as we took that down up framework before, we're going to start with that. Let's take out the first upstroke. And we're playing it quite fast eventually, so but we'll start off slow. So your right hand is always going down, up, down, up, down, up. But without skipping out that second up. Okay, so that's the A, and what we're going to do is we're going to move from the A to the D, back to the A, to the E, and repeat. So the strumming thing is difficult in a way when you get to chords that only use the top 4 strings, for example, on the D string. But what you can do here is, there's 2 things you can do. Your right hand, you can practice your targeting of the strings. So I'm only using the top 4 strings, which means my right arm is moving less like this all over the place. If it was, I'd be hitting these lower strings. We don't want that. So that takes a little bit more precision. The other thing you can do is use your thumb to mute those 2 lower strings, and then you don't have to worry about your right arm so much, because they're just making that kind of choked out sound. You can barely hear it. Another little cheat for you there. You can do the same with the A major. Don't have to worry about the E. So that chord progression will sound like this. Again, when it's slower, it's easier to change between those chords. This is a little trickier, by the way, so if you got this far, well done to you. So at that speed I've got time to change between each chord, but in real life we're going to play it a lot faster. So you can do that trick as mentioned before. On that last upstroke we can skip it out, no one's going to know. It's actually going to sound cooler than if you nailed it. And there's ways to make it more subtle, it just takes a bit of practice. And you might notice as well, when I'm playing it fast, I'm slightly changing that rhythm that's been written down, and at the end I'm just doing down up because it sounds cool. And you can kind of blend between them. The more natural you get with it, you'll pick it up. It started to really rain down here. We're in Leeds, England. It's thunderstorms after days of summer. There's the Nico weather report that you didn't ask for. And then lastly, I'll quickly touch on probably the most difficult of all of these strumming patterns. Bo Didley beat is very well known, and there's actually lots of different versions of it. If you listen to Bo Didley, he'll be playing lots of different versions of it, but people have taken it for their own. If you look at George Michael, Faith very much takes that Bo Didley beat. There's hundreds of other examples that I can't think of now, but that's kind of the basic version that I would show you. there you go, lots of examples to practice. If you've got this far, well done. If you want to get PDFs of these tabs, then go visit my Patreon below. I've also got a merch shop down there if you want to support me, and I'll be putting up videos every couple of weeks and some exclusive ones every month or so with backing tracks, all that kind of stuff. Okay, so thanks for watching this. Hopefully you found it useful. Save it, share it, tell your mates. Maybe it's something you can come back to when you're working on it. If strumming's something you want to learn about, let me know how you get on. Thanks a lot, see you later.